Exploring the intriguing topics of life from sports, culture, and yes, politics, broadcasting from a semi-undisclosed location. Welcome to Tobias Land, USA. Hello, my people, and welcome back to Tobias Land, USA, where any and every topic on this, the third rock from the sun, can be discussed. I am the mayor, county mayor, governor, president, prime minister, founding father, and or king of Tobias Land, USA, Tobias DeBose, or just the host for short. So, welcome back to the third part in the SEC 2026 predictions series that I am doing here on the Tobias Land USA podcast. For episodes 1 and 2 respectively, I did Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, and Florida, then Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, and Mississippi State. For part 3, which is this episode, I will be covering the schedules for Missouri, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and South Carolina, and give my prediction on how the season will go for all 4 of those teams. If you haven't checked out part 1 or part 2, go ahead and make sure you check those out. And stay tuned for the final episode, or the final part of this series, as I predict the SEC schedule. But kicking off the third part in this series, I have the Missouri Tigers. So heading into the 2026 season, they are 8th in the SEC as far as offensive production returning, as 59% of their offense is returning in 2026. However, they are dead last, 16th in defensive production returning, as they come in at 40%. And for their strength of schedule ranking, according to ESPN, they are 12th in the nation. And kicking things off for Missouri on September 5th, they host Arkansas Pine Bluff, an FCS foe. That's going to be an automatic victory. The following week on Friday, September 11th, which is going to be a night game, Missouri plays their former rivals in the Big 12 in the Border War, as they take on the Kansas Jayhawks in Lawrence, Kansas. This will be played at Kansas, not in Missouri. For this one, I'm going to go with Missouri over Kansas, because while Kansas a few years ago did turn things around, and they actually were pretty good and actually went to a bowl game after doing nothing at all during the 2010s, Kansas has kind of slipped down a little bit in a way. Now, they are in the Big 12, and the Big 12 conference kind of sort of is a free-for-all right now, in the best way possible. Not an insult, it's just that it's a free-for-all in a good way. But for this matchup, I do like Missouri over Kansas, although I do expect it to be a close rival, as I do expect this to be a closer matchup than experts might think, given the history of those two teams, even if they haven't played each other much since Missouri left the Big 12 for the SEC. The next week, on September 19th, Missouri returns to Columbia where they host Troy. They win that one, and they also play the next week on September 26th. They play at Mississippi State in Starkville. I like Missouri in that one to win. And then on October 3rd, they do play the Florida Gators at home for homecoming on October 3rd. This is going to be a bit of a tricky game, because Florida has a new head coach and Missouri's keeping their head coach, but even though it is homecoming and Missouri should win, I'm going to go with Florida to get the victory in that one. So that's Missouri's first loss of the season, and they lose their next two after that, as they lose to Texas A&M at home in Columbia. Now, A&M and Missouri have a lot of history, not just because they used to be in the Big 12 conference, but also they did for a little bit of time. They played each other every season in the SEC, at least the first 2 or 3 years before that rivalry broke up, as A&M played South Carolina and Missouri played Arkansas. But besides that, it's good to see those two teams playing again. And in this matchup, I do like Texas A&M over Missouri, as Texas A&M will be a tad bit better than they were last season. But I do like Texas A&M winning that one against Missouri. And then lastly, before their October 24th open date, Missouri plays at Ole Miss in a match where I do think Ole Miss will win, simply because it's on the road in Oxford, although Missouri could pull it off, considering the fact that Ole Miss is taking a step backwards. So October 24th is their opening date, and then they return on October 31st to play at Arkansas and Fayetteville. Now this is technically a rivalry because they have a trophy, but again, trophies doesn't necessarily mean anything, as this doesn't really feel like a natural rivalry. It just kind of feels like a shove down your throat rivalry made for you to like, which no one really cares too much about. But other than that, Arkansas and Missouri are playing each other on Halloween, and I think that given the fact that Arkansas is a much, much worse team than Missouri is, I do like Missouri to win that one. On November 7th, Missouri plays another team from Texas, this time being the Texas Longhorns. Texas, for this one, I'm going to go with Texas to beat Missouri in Columbia, because while Arkansas is a far worse team than Missouri is, Texas is a far better team than Missouri is. So for that, I like Texas on the road against Missouri in Columbia. Next up, November 14th, Georgia plays Missouri in Athens. Again, that's going to be on November 14th in Athens. And Georgia, like Texas, is a much, much better team than Missouri is, and I don't see Georgia really struggling much with Missouri, especially at home. The next week, Kentucky plays Missouri in Columbia. Kentucky is worse than Georgia and far worse than Missouri for that matter too. And I like Missouri to win that one. And finally, on their last regular season game on November 28th, I do like Oklahoma over Missouri. So Missouri would lose to Oklahoma. So pretty much Missouri's last 5 games. So after their open date, which is going to be October 31st at Arkansas, November 7th against Texas, November 14th at Georgia, November 21st against Kentucky, and November 28th against Oklahoma. Those games are interesting because Missouri just might have the most complicated schedule in all of the SEC, because all the good teams that they play are a whole hell of a lot better than Missouri is, but all the bad teams Missouri play are a whole hell of a lot worse than Missouri is. So that's why I think it's kind of odd. And it's funny I say that because I do believe that Missouri has one of the easiest schedules in all of the SEC, or not even easy, more or less more manageable, because if you look at who everybody plays in the SEC this season, nobody has an easy schedule. But my point is, Missouri has a more manageable schedule than most teams in the SEC. But it's just that all the good teams are far more better than Missouri is, and all the bad teams they play are far worse than Missouri is. But just to recap real quickly, Missouri wins 4 straight to start the season, with wins over Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kansas, Troy, and Mississippi State, then losing 3 straight to Florida, A&M, and Ole Miss. Then when they return from their off week on October 24th, they play Arkansas. They beat Arkansas, lose to Texas and Georgia, beat Kentucky, then lose to Oklahoma to finish the 2026 regular season with a victory of 6 wins and 6 losses. Up next is the Oklahoma Sooners. This is their 3rd season in the SEC after leaving the Big 12 Conference along with Texas. Last season they made it to the college football playoffs. However, they blew a 17-point lead against Alabama in the first round at home in Norman. And coming into this, hopefully they're looking to turn things around and try to redeem for how their season ended last season. Starting this season, or I should say, heading into the 2026 season, the Oklahoma Sooners play, or I should say, hold on, lost my notes. Here we go. Heading into the 2026 season, the Oklahoma Sooners are second in the SEC in returning offensive production, as 75% of their offense is returning. And then, however, they are tied for 11th in the SEC in defensive production returning, as 55% comes back this season. And for their strength of schedule, according to ESPN, the Oklahoma Sooners are second in the nation, and they kick off 2026 against Texas El Paso on September 5th. That's going to be a win, no question about that. Their next game, their first kind of sort of big game, and I say kind of sort of big because on September 12th at noon, they play at Michigan. Now, had what happened with Sharon Moore not happened, this might have been a different result, or at least be a much closer game. But because this is Michigan's second head coach in 3 seasons after Jim Harbaugh left them after winning them a national championship in 2023, Michigan is still trying to find their identity right now. And I do think that Oklahoma beat Michigan last season in Norman. I think that Michigan will get another victory over Oklahoma will get another victory over Michigan again in 2026. They win that one. Up next is New Mexico. New Mexico is September 19th. I think I have them winning that one. And then on September 26th, the Oklahoma Sooners play Georgia in Athens, their first real test, because while Michigan is a big historic brand name in college football, they're not necessarily good. They're not like what they were under Jim Harbaugh a few years earlier. However, so for this one, I do think Oklahoma loses, although there is potential that it could be a shootout. But honestly, I do think Georgia wins by at least 10 in Athens, handing Oklahoma their first loss of the season. They do get October 3rd off and return October 10th for the Red River rivalry, or the Red River shootout, or whatever you want to call it, between Oklahoma and Texas. Oklahoma has lost 3 of the last 4 meetings against Texas whenever they play in Cotton Bowl Stadium at the State Fair of Texas and Dallas. And I think Oklahoma will lose their fourth of the last 4 out of the last 5 as they lose to Texas this year. I think now they do get back on the winning track, winning a few straight games, first defeating Kentucky on October 17th at home in Norman, then winning at Mississippi State on October 24th. I think they will get a competitive game out of South Carolina on October 31st. However, I think because it's at home and not on the road at South Carolina, I do believe Oklahoma will win that game. However, South Carolina can make it close, and their winning ways continue as they play an improving Florida team on November 7th. And while Florida has improved some, Florida is still under the first year of a new head coach, whereas Oklahoma is under the 5th year of their current head coach, Brent Venables. So for that, even though it is going to be a road game in Gainesville, I like Oklahoma beating Florida. The next week, you get another competitive matchup, this time against Ole Miss. However, Ole Miss did take a step back, given the fact who they lost after last season. And so for that, I like Oklahoma to beat Ole Miss on October 14th. Their penultimate game, which occurs on November 21st, will be against the Texas A&M Aggies at home. While this is a home game, I do believe that Texas A&M will be just a tad bit better than they were last season, as A&M will have played a little bit more better than they did last season. However, it won't be enough for Oklahoma to overcome, and I like Texas A&M handing Oklahoma another loss. This one being November 21st in Norman. And then to end the regular season for Oklahoma, they play at Missouri, but I do believe that is going to be a loss for Missouri and a win for Oklahoma. So just to recap, I have Oklahoma winning against Texas El Paso, Michigan, New Mexico, then losing to Georgia, and then losing to Texas, and then winning 5 straight against Kentucky, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Florida, Ole Miss, then losing to Texas A&M, and ending the regular season with a victory over Missouri. So the next team I'm going to talk about now is going to be the Ole Miss Rebels, a new era of Rebel football as their former head coach Ole Miss is no longer with the program. Now heading into the 2026 season, the Ole Miss Rebels are tied for sixth with 61% of their offensive production from last season returning. They're also sixth again, but this time they are at 62% in the SEC when it comes to returning defensive production. On top of that, coming in at fifth place is the Ole Miss Rebels, and that fifth place ranking for them is their strength of schedule record according to ESPN. And kicking things off on September 5th is going to be a matchup against Louisville and Nashville on kickoff weekend. I think Ole Miss starts off the season with a point to say that even though Lane Kiffin is no longer at LSU, they are still a force to be reckoned with. So for that, I do like Ole Miss over Louisville. The next day, or should say the next week, they do play Charlotte on September 12th. That's going to be a simple win. One of the biggest marquee matches in not just the SEC, but in all of college football, at least for the first part of the season, is going to be Ole Miss hosting their former head coach, Lane Kiffin, and his new team, LSU. This is probably going to be a game day. It's going to be a night game. It's going to be loud. It's going to be ruckus. The Ole Miss fans are probably going to be drunk like pretty much everybody at the SEC is on any given Saturday, but for the Ole Miss Rebels, they haven't forgotten. They feel like they're going to this is like a game to prove that, Ole Miss has already proven so much. Because I have to remember, Lane Kiffin left them high and dry after the regular season ended. He didn't even stay around for the playoffs. He literally left them to dry. Yet they almost made it to the national championship game before losing to Miami, who was the eventual runner-up. But for this game against LSU, while I think the Ole Miss crowd at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium in Oxford will be ruckus and they will be loud, I still like LSU. I think LSU will pull out the victory in this one. The next week, Ole Miss loses their second straight game, this time being at Florida. And again, Florida will be an improved team, and for whatever reason, it feels like whenever Ole Miss and Florida play each other, something odd always happens, or something momentous, because this was the game that led to Tim Tebow giving his iconic speech that led him to win his second national championship at Florida in 2008. About 11 years ago, after Ole Miss beat Alabama for a second consecutive season, they then got blown out by Florida, if you remember. So, and then 2 years ago in 2024, it seemed like Ole Miss was going to get into the college football playoffs the first year for the 12 team, but then they lose to Florida. So, strange things happen, and I think this will be no different, as I do have the Florida Gators over the Ole Miss Rebels on September 26th. October 3rd is Ole Miss's bye week, and they return October 10th, where they play Vanderbilt in Nashville. Vanderbilt will be taking a step back, and I think Ole Miss will be able to take care of them in Nashville. Plus, the next week, Ole Miss plays Missouri at home. I think Missouri and Ole Miss is going to be is another toss-up I had, because I had plenty of toss-ups on this as I was looking through everyone's schedule. And this is one of those games where it just came down to who was going to be playing at home. And the home team between Missouri and Ole Miss this year is going to be Ole Miss. They're the home team. Will be played in Oxford. So for that, I like Mississippi State over Missouri. However, I don't like Ole Miss over Texas, as that's going to be played October 24th in Austin, and Texas is arguably going to be the best team in the SEC next season, and I think Texas handles Ole Miss convincingly. The next week is Halloween, and Ole Miss plays an underrated rival, that being the Auburn Tigers. Now, Auburn and Ole Miss, in my opinion, might be the most underrated rivalry in the all of SEC. Not because they haven't had any notable moments. They've had some pretty cool and notable moments against each other. The key in all of that, however, is that because of the two common opponents they share, those two opponents being Alabama and LSU, the highlights between Ole Miss and Auburn can be forgotten at times. But I do believe it's going to be a hidden gem in the SEC season, in the SEC football season. It's going to be a hidden gem. I think it's going to be a very watchable game, and I think Ole Miss gets the win of that on Halloween. The next week, Ole Miss will be playing Georgia. Similar to Florida, interesting things happen anytime Ole Miss plays Georgia, especially over the last 2 seasons, because the week before, Ole Miss lost to Florida and cost them their chance of being in the college football playoffs for the 12 team the first year in 2024. Ole Miss beat Georgia at home in Oxford. The next season, in 2025, it was a back-and-forth shootout between Ole Miss and Georgia, but Georgia was able to pull it out in the end. But those two play each other again, this time in the Sugar Bowl quarterfinal near the end of the 2025 season, a matchup where Ole Miss, who was without Lane Kiffin and an interim coaching staff, they beat Georgia and went on to the semifinals. So this is another rival. This is going to be another rematch, and what's starting to become another hidden gem in the SEC between Ole Miss and Georgia. But I do believe that because Ole Miss is taking a step back in Georgia, like Texas, is arguably going to be the best team in the SEC again this season, I gotta go with the Georgia Bulldogs over the Ole Miss Rebels. And then the next week on October 14th, or I should say on November 14th, as I just pointed out, I do like Ole Miss. I do like Oklahoma over Ole Miss as it will be a home game for Oklahoma, and I do think they will have improved some. Oklahoma has, but I do also think that by the time that Ole Miss and Oklahoma have played each other, that there have been some improvements on Ole Miss's side of the ball. On November 21st, they do play Wofford, a FCS team. They get the win there, and they end their season with a victory over Mississippi State. And again, that's going to be played on November 27th, the day after Thanksgiving, on Black Friday. So just to recap, I have Ole Miss winning against Louisville and Charlotte, then losing to LSU in Florida, then beating Vanderbilt in Missouri, then losing to Texas, then winning to Auburn, then losing 2 straight to Georgia and Oklahoma, then beating Wofford and Mississippi State to end the regular season, and they will finish their first regular season without Lane Kiffin with a record of 7 wins and 5 losses. A not too terrible way to begin their first iteration of the post-Lane Kiffin era of Ole Miss football. So the last team I want to talk about before I end this video is going to be the South Carolina Gamecocks. Perhaps the most disappointing team in not just the SEC but in all of college football was South Carolina, as they finished the 2024 regular season 9 wins and 3 losses. It felt like they might have been able to get into the college football playoffs. However, due to the fact that their star quarterback Lenore Sellers was injured, and that they finished the season as one of the worst teams in the SEC last season, it was a disappointment. Plus, this upcoming season for their head coach Shane Beamer is going to be how do I say this? It's going to be a make or break year, because if things don't go well, this could be Shane Beamer could be looking for another job after 2026. But to begin this, but for South Carolina, as they head into the 2026 football season, ranked first in the SEC in offensive production returning with 76%. They are tied for 7th in the SEC in defensive production returning at 61%. And for their strength of schedule ranking, according to ESPN, they are 10th in the nation. South Carolina begins with Kent State on September 5th, an easy victory. Another easy victory will be against Towson, an FCS foe, on September 12th. That's going to be a win. And against Mississippi State, that's their first SEC conference foe of the season. And for that, I think that's going to be a 3-0 start for South Carolina. However, the good times are going to temporarily end for now, as on September 26th, they do play at Alabama. Now, the good news is for South Carolina is they've been able to compete with Alabama each of the last 2 seasons. And not only did they almost beat Alabama, but one could argue that they should have beaten Alabama. As you know, Alabama barely escaped with the skin of their teeth in those 2 matchups. But for this matchup, I do like Alabama to win, as this will be played at home in Tuscaloosa instead of Columbia. Now, the next matchup for South Carolina will be against Kentucky, and that game will be played on October 3rd. And October 3rd is going to be against Kentucky and Columbia. Kentucky, as I said, is going to be one of the worst SEC foes, or I should say, one of the worst SEC teams heading into the 2026 season. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to be in the bottom 4, along with Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. So, given the fact that it will be played in Columbia, not Lexington, I honestly don't see why South Carolina would lose to Kentucky. So for that, give me a Kentucky victory over a South Carolina victory over Kentucky. Now, October 17th is South Carolina's open date, but before that, they do have to travel to Florida to take on the Gators. And while the Florida Gators will have improved some, I don't think it's going to be enough for them to overcome South Carolina, as I do believe that South Carolina is as South Carolina is a much better team, and Florida is still under the first year of a new head coach. Now, it is in Gainesville, so it does help Florida, but I still think South Carolina wins that one. Fast forward 2 weeks later, South Carolina returns from their bye week as they host the Tennessee Volunteers. This is one of those matchups in the SEC that doesn't really get talked about enough as far as the history goes, because over the time span of 16 seasons, from 2008 until 2023, South Carolina and Tennessee split the series with 8 wins for South Carolina and 8 wins for Tennessee. In 2008, it's the series between those two that from 2008 to 2023 started with South Carolina winning the first one in 2008 at home in Columbia, then Tennessee winning at home in Knoxville. Then they both three-peat each other not once but twice apiece. South Carolina won 3 straight over Tennessee in 2010, 2011, and 2012. Then Tennessee won 3 straight in 2013, 2014, and 2015. Then South Carolina won 3 straight again after that in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And then Tennessee won 3 straight after that in 2019, 2020, and 2021. Then South Carolina won in 2022 and then Tennessee won after that in 2023, and that was the last time those two teams played each other. And so the 2026 meeting between South Carolina and Tennessee will in fact be the first time in 3 years they've played each other. And I say this because nobody tennis for all we talk about how like certain teams give certain teams fits, like Alabama gives Georgia fits and Ole Miss gives Georgia fits, and there are other examples that I'm leaving out, but one team that's given Tennessee fits is South Carolina, because those victories that I mentioned, two of them, two of those victories, 2016 and 2022, they cost Tennessee some historical moments, because had Tennessee beat South Carolina in 2016, they would have not only gone to the SEC championship game and played in Atlanta, but Tennessee probably does not lose to Vanderbilt, and even if they don't make it to the SEC championship game, Tennessee could have still played in the Sugar Bowl instead of playing in the Music City Bowl against Nebraska in 2016. And then in 2022, had Tennessee beat South Carolina and not lost by more than 30 points, Tennessee would have gone to the college football playoffs in 2022. The only reason they didn't was because they got blown out by South Carolina in a game where their quarterback Hendon Hooker got injured early on. But which is why for this one, I'm going to go with an upset and have South Carolina over Tennessee. And while it's going to be a big victory for South Carolina, that victory won't last long, as the next week on Halloween they lose to Oklahoma in Norman. But they will turn it around, as I do think they will defeat Texas A&M in South. They would defeat South Carolina. South Carolina will defeat Texas A&M in South Carolina on November 7th, like they did 2 years ago in 2024, as it's a hard place to play, and that will be a night game, especially considering how last season South Carolina blew a 31-0 lead over Texas A&M, and how South Carolina still has their head coach Shane Beamer is beyond me. But I do believe South Carolina gets their win back on November 7th. The next week on November 14th, they do play at a very bad Arkansas team. I think they win that. However, they do play Georgia on November 21st, and while Georgia has made it interesting, they've beaten Georgia a few times over the last 15 years. As a matter of fact, one of the times South Carolina beat Georgia was in 2019 in Athens, which ended up being the last time until last season Georgia lost to anyone at home in Athens. And again, for the longest time, South Carolina had the distinction of being the last team to beat Georgia at home, which was in 2019, but that streak eventually ended when Georgia lost to Alabama. But for this one, while it will be at home, and I think it's going to be close, and it's going to come down to whoever has the ball last, I think Georgia is just too much of a better team to lose to South Carolina. And then for November 28th, I've got South Carolina over Clemson, because similar to the home team between Tennessee and Alabama the last 5 seasons, the road team in this matchup between Clemson and South Carolina has won each of the last 5 meetings, as Clemson won in Columbia in 21, 23, and 25, while South Carolina won on the road in Clemson in 22 and 24. And I think South Carolina gets another victory against Clemson in Clemson to win that one and in the regular season. So one more time to recap, I have South Carolina winning their first 3 against Kent State, Towson, and Mississippi State, then losing at Alabama, then winning 2 more against Kentucky and Florida. Their off weeks is October 17th, then beat Tennessee, then lose to Oklahoma, then win 2 straight against Texas A&M and Arkansas. Then they defeat Georgia, they lose to Georgia, then they defeat Clemson, their in-state rival, which is a non-conference matchup on the road. And for their final record, it's going to be for South Carolina, I have them finishing the season with 9 wins and 3 losses. So just to recap one more time for this video, I have Missouri finishing the 2026 season with 6 wins and 6 losses. I have Oklahoma finishing 2026 with 9 wins and 3 losses. I have Ole Miss finishing the regular season with 7 wins and 5 losses, and I have South Carolina finishing the regular season with 9 wins and 3 losses. So share your thoughts on those four teams. What do you think I got right? What do you think I got wrong? And as well, and again, as I said, if you haven't checked the part 1 where I cover Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, and Florida, or part 2 where I cover Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, and Mississippi State, do check out those videos. And until the final part of my 2026 SEC prediction series, this is Tobias DeBow saying, take care of yourself and each other, and remember, peace, love, understanding, a stogie, and an ice-cold beer is what will save the world. You've been listening to the Tobias Land USA podcast, a production of Riverside Studios.